Coming up on Tech News Weekly, Google might be censoring its search for the Chinese market, what it's like to direct a successful viral short, going nuclear and deleting all of your Twitter history, and Fortnite tutors, it's a thing. All that more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 43, recorded Thursday, August 2nd, 2018. This episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Slide Belts, high-quality, comfortable ratchet belts that are easy to adjust. If you want a better belt, go to slidebelts.com/twit and use code TWIT for 20% off. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tech News Weekly. This is the show where we sit down with some people who are making and breaking the biggest tech news stories of the week. I'm Jason Howell, and to my side is not Megan Maroney this week. She would be out here outside of the frame of view, and it would be strange if we framed it like this and she was sitting there. Rest assured, she's not. She's enjoying herself, I think. She'll be back next week. For public companies, the pursuit is always on growth because continual growth means keeping up with shareholder expectations, just as one thing. And really, at the end of the day, growth means money. For tech companies, the Chinese market is one that promises a potentially untapped and massive pool of new users, and that can be a gold mine for growth if it's not already utilized. Google itself has a long history with China, but hasn't offered its search service in the country for almost a decade. And now there's a new report that published on the Intercept that shows that Google might be preparing to make a major shift in its strategy in order to tackle the Chinese market again. Joining us to talk about this is the author of the Intercept article that reveals these unreleased internal plans, Ryan Gallagher. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's really great to get you here tonight. So let's kind of start by going back a little bit in time, step in our time machine. Google used to offer search services in China. Ultimately, Google pulled out of that market. Talk a little bit about what Google offered exactly back then and why they bailed out on China in the first place.
Well, back then, you're talking between 2006 and 2010. For about a 4-year period, they ran just like a normal sort of Google search as you and I would think about it, except for that it was a censored version. So it kind of looked like Google, a Chinese version of Google, but it wasn't giving people the full scope of breadth of information when they were putting in searches, certain search terms, whatever a normal kind of search that you would do on Google. It wasn't bringing up certain kinds of information that was deemed, undesirable by the ruling Communist Party regime in China. And that caused a massive controversy at the time across the world, but particularly in the US, of course, as Google is a major American company, because people felt like this was a violation of American principles, the First Amendment, free speech and all of that. And eventually the heat became so much on Google that they pulled out of China in 2010, citing all these concerns about the censorship. So kind of fast forward 8 years, and now we're in this kind of strange situation where they're actually completely reversing on the position they took in 2010 and looking to get back in and do the censorship again, which they had claimed in 2010 that they couldn't tolerate.
Yeah, apparently the heat that was there has cooled off a little bit. So that then points to the fact that now maybe historically, maybe worldwide for a number of reasons, political reasons, who knows, now is a better time with which to do this? Or do you think Google is just so desperate to reach a wider market that now they're willing to kind of take that heat in order to enter the market?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think that I would say they're desperate. I mean, they are such a massive company. They have so much money, so much resources, so many resources that they don't. There's nothing really that they need to do for the survival of the company.
Right.
But there's like a strategic thing here where the current CEO Sundar Pichai, he has a very different attitude to China as previous CEOs did, like Larry Page and Eric Schmidt. Sundar, he took over in 2015, and he wants to get back in China. You know, this is strategically, he thinks it's good for Google to be in China. Like you said, it is a massive market for them, and there is a huge revenue thing there where they would be able to generate massive amounts of money by just having the search opened up in China, the advertising revenue, for example. So yeah, that is one big aspect of it. But I think strategically and politically, there's just a different feeling at the top of Google now. The leadership has changed, and as such, the direction of the company is changing, and that's what you're seeing here.
Yeah, we've heard Sundar Pichai and just Google in general talk the last couple of years about the next billion users, and really in order to do that, in order to reach the next billion, you have to go into some of these untapped markets. I know India is one that they feel, you know, they need to ramp up and really target. China, completely untapped at this point because they simply haven't been there, and just the massive amount of people, you know, that could potentially be using the service. What kind of restrictions would we be looking at then? Because China's heavily censored, you know, their government heavily censors, you know, anything that their citizens see. So what is Google apparently willing to do to strip away from its own service in order to get in there?
Well, it's willing to do exactly what has to be done, which is compliance with the current censorship regime in China. To understand what Google would have to do, you just have to look at what is happening in China now. Look at what the companies like Baidu, the main search engine there, have to do. WeChat, Weibo, these kind of platforms. Look at the censorship that exists on there, and it is so broad. It's quite astonishing, actually, because you're not just talking about the political stuff, like you're not just talking about opposition to the Communist Party or dissidents or that kind of thing, which you would expect. You're actually talking about literature. You're talking about information about Western legal systems. You're talking about academic studies. You're talking about even information to do with sex and pornography that is blanket centered on some of these platforms. And then obviously the historic stuff like the Tiananmen Square massacre, information like that. That's the kind of breadth of it. It's really quite, it's incredible. And so Google is getting into bed with that, really, when it's saying that it's going to launch in China. It's agreeing to go forward with that by designing this platform to launch in China.
Yeah, and then my question in that regard then becomes, when a company the size of Google, you know, had an ethical issue with this initially and decided to pull out of that market, and then later decides, actually, we're okay with this, thereby, you know, saying that they're okay with kind of pulling the wool over an entire, you know, nation's citizens, pulling the wool over their eyes and allowing them to be in many ways misdirected or misinformed or not informed at all about certain facets of reality. I mean, doesn't that then you could argue that Google is complicit to a certain degree with that? Or is this just more about like, hey, this is a business, businesses have to make money, and shareholders will forgive and forget?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, you know, the problem is life isn't just about business. You know, life is about principles. Life is about, you know, democracies. Life is about information, freedom of information. You can't just make decisions based on money. If you do that, you can get yourself into all kinds of terrible situations.
Sure.
So I think that for me, it's not even an argument. Google, if it does this, is going to be complicit. The very act of censoring the platform is complicity. That's just, for me, a fact. I think that, you know, I don't know if Google has some kind of intention that it believes, or I mean, I'm referring to it as a singular thing, but I'm talking about the leadership of Google, maybe that they believe a sort of restricted version of Google is better than no version at all. But you have to make an absolutely massive compromise, because you're not just talking about, like I said, you know, a limited set of you know, particularly sensitive politically information. You're talking about like a broad swathe of all kinds of information. And Google, as a company that is supposed to be founded on a value that is in favor of open access to information, it does just seem like a total compromise of that really fundamental value that the company was essentially founded upon. And this is why it's quite a stunning thing for them to be saying they're going to go and do this again.
And why I imagine at this point Google is really kind of kicking itself for ever having had "Don't be evil" as something that was attached to the name. Not that Google itself would necessarily look at this and say, well, we're being evil now, why did we ever do that? But because that is a comment that will continually come around and bite them in the butt anytime they do something that could possibly be perceived as siding with evil or whatever the case may be. And then as far as the citizens of China are concerned, it's my understanding that there are a lot of people within China that understand that there are ways around these blocks, things like VPN and everything. What do you think about that? I mean, is that widely enough kind of known within China for this to kind of be maybe a little less, I don't know, a little less important in regards to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, people in China, I think what you would say is tech savvy internet users in China understand how to get around the restrictions. But it's actually getting harder because one of the things the government there has actually done in the last couple of years, they've cracked down quite severely on like VPNs, for example. They've been trying to stop people from getting around the restrictions. So it is actually becoming more difficult. But yeah, certainly people who are savvy enough will be able to get around the restrictions. I mean, you'll find that anywhere. There's always going to be savvy people in any situation where there's censorship who find a way to get around it. But for the majority of people, I mean, you're talking about 750 million internet users in China. That's more than the entire population of Europe. It's a huge amount of people. Most of those people, 95%, are accessing the internet on mobile devices. Then about 80% of that is Android. So they're not, I mean, these are just normal, ordinary people. I don't think that these people, and these are the people who are going to be affected by the app, because the app, remember, is not, it's not going to be a desktop search, at least not initially. This isn't Google's plan. It's only on Android. These are probably not going to be the people who understand how to dodge the censorship. So yeah, I think it would be fair to say the overwhelming majority will be having to use this blocked version of Google that's kind of a restricted version that doesn't give the full picture of the information that's out there in the world.
Yeah. And I think something that kind of concerns me about everything that I've seen here is kind of about the signal that is sent from this decision. A company the size of Google once had this ethical choice in this regard, now going in the reverse to say, okay, well, actually, maybe it is okay. And I should also point out, this isn't happening confirmed. This is a report that you put out based on information from inside. So this is still very much in the works behind the scenes. We'll see what comes out of it over time. But what signal does this send to other tech companies? Or what signal does this even say to democratic countries that may decide, well, this is possible. Now the door is open, and then suddenly, even in democratic countries, this becomes an option. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to say that the project itself, it isn't just like some blue sky little quirky thing that's happening in the corner of Google. This has been sanctioned right at the top of the company, and it's actually been in a state that they could, within a short period of time, just launch it within 1 or 2 weeks' notice.
Wow.
And the only thing that they've been waiting on is approval from the Chinese government. And like I put in the story, the negotiations for this have been going on for a long time. Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, went across last December to China, had a private closed-door meeting with a man called Wang Huning, who is one of the top foreign policy advisors to President Xi in China. So this thing is like really serious. They were very, very, very serious about launching it almost at any moment. Just get the only thing is the political consideration on the part of the Chinese government to actually approve the thing. And they've been shown demonstrations of it, and they're waiting to basically for it to be shown that it's doing sufficient censorship. That's one of the things. Wow. So yeah, I just want to clarify this is very real. But the precedent, I mean, yeah, for sure, it sets a precedent. It sends a message, doesn't it? Sends a message to other companies that want to go into China that if even Google, one of the most powerful companies in the entire world, is going to go along with this censorship, well, then we must have, there's no way we can not do it either. You know, so I think it kind of weakens the hand of other companies that want to resist. And also it gives other countries, governments that are authoritarian dictatorships in other parts of the world, they're going to be looking at and thinking, we want a piece of this action as well. Why can't we have a censored version of Google? They're going to be thinking, well, if you're going to do it in China, you should be doing it in our country. And so, like, it's like a kind of domino effect, and that's one of the big concerns. In fact, of some of the sources who were brave enough to come out and actually leak this, they were worried that this is setting a model for other countries to also embrace.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think one of the quotes, I'm against large companies and governments collaborating in the oppression of their people. It kind of sums it up right there. Really fantastic work, Ryan Gallagher. I'm a big fan of your work at The Intercept, and I just want to thank you for joining us and for publishing this. We'll definitely be watching to see on any follow-ups, and hopefully this doesn't suddenly just appear out of nowhere, and if it does, we'll know who to talk to. So, Ryan, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jason.
All right, take care and have a good night.
You too.
All right, the definition of an earworm, at least according to Wikipedia, is a catchy piece of music that continually repeats through a person's mind after it's no longer playing. I define, personally, earworm as what happens when you watch the 2014 Adult Swim short called Too Many Cooks. It was a riff, if you haven't seen it, you got to see it. It was a riff on 80s and 90s television with a song that never seems to end and a whole lot of unexpected twists and ultimately very dark turns. It's fantastic. And now the creator of that short has another masterpiece called Final Deployment 4, Queen Battle Walkthrough. Fans of Twitch culture are gonna love it. Joining us is director and co-creator of Final Deployment 4, Casper Kelly. Welcome to the show, Casper.
Hello, Jason. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'm honored to get the chance to talk to you because your work has made me laugh and feel very uncertain time and time again, so I appreciate it. It's going to be hard to do an interview on this one without revealing too much, but we'll do our best here. First, tell me why you and co-creator Nick Gibbons saw video game streaming as kind of like a ripe genre for picking.
Well, I think we both are addicted to it. And then also my children would watch it even for games they didn't play. So it's just such becoming the center of culture now, you know, in a way more than, what movies used to be, gaming is becoming more and more. So it just seemed like a ripe opportunity to explore it and do something with it.
Absolutely. So what kind of a gamer would you say you are then? Like, what kind of history do you have with games? And do you actually enjoy sitting down and watching gamers do walkthroughs and that sort of stuff?
I definitely will watch a walkthrough if I get stuck on something. I mean, I try to do it myself first, but if I get stuck, I will definitely watch a walkthrough. And I'll watch reviews. I'm a little less likely to watch Fortnite or PUBG amazing players do it, but I've done it, Yeah. It is interesting. But my children, man, they never tire of it.
Yeah, I know. And it gets bigger and bigger. I think Fortnite right now is the most streamed game. We're actually going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show as well. This piece and, your other work definitely have a very dark comedy bend to it. I'll just give you a warning. Josh is our TD. Just so you know, Josh, there are moments where you might want to cut away, but it's really fantastic piece of comedy here. But it also, and I think this is kind of throughout your works specifically, it touches on topics that can be a little bit uncomfortable. This one in particular touches on things like military, war-related PTSD, returning home from war, things like that are topics that can be difficult to discuss. Yet you have a dark comedy edge to it. How do you? I don't know how you successfully straddle the line between those things. How do you approach that?
That's a great question. And you're right. I think we wanted to explore it, but we tried to be sensitive about it. And even I think we were protected a little bit by the Space Marine trope is such a big trope in video games that it just seemed a natural idea to explore this soldier coming home from war. And I think just the sort of stiff nature of the animation and everything prevented it from being too offensive. And actually, I've heard from vets who think it's hilarious. So
yeah. Well, no doubt. It's interesting watching it because you started off. And actually, this is the case with Too Many Cooks as well. You started off and you think what you were watching is one thing specifically because you tend to like top load your pieces for a while in one certain thing. It kind of lulls you into this false sense of security. You're like, I know what this is. Okay, I see where we're going. And then somewhere down the line, it just takes a U-turn and goes into a completely different direction. But that intermixed with the comedy and the somewhat more challenging kind of underlying themes. You've also got it kind of touches on the gaming world, violence, depression. Even depression seems to be a topic that comes up time and time again. Are you with pieces like this? Is your attempt to make a broader, reflective kind of approach on some of these topics, like depression?
Yes, and addiction. And I think I have a little bit of all of that. Like I have had times where I'll say I'm going to play a game for an hour, and then you cut to it's 6 a.m.
Yes.
And it doesn't feel good. It's fun, but it doesn't feel good to not have control over what you're supposed to do. So I definitely am not particularly looking down on gamers. This is for Nick Gibbons and I, it was an examination of ourselves, because we feel like these people,
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that makes for the best, the best content, right? Is when you create it close to yourself. Inevitably, there are many other people that are right there along with you. And so it becomes very reflective in a broader sense. So I know obviously this was created for TV, but is doing really well online. That was the case for Too Many Cooks. I think that was initially created for Adult Swim, but then took on a life of its own online in a viral sense. Does that even come into kind of the consideration when you're devising a show or a film like this about its like virality, its ability to exist online? Because even the topic here is basically made for the internet. So what about that?
I'll give you kind of a nitty gritty answer to that. Is I think we try not to worry about virality because that can just drive you crazy as a writer and freeze you up, but make you freeze up rather. But I think that one thing, and also we imagine that most people by far will watch this online versus on television. But there was something somebody pointed out. Most of the YouTube comments were amazing, but one person, I shouldn't even say this, but I will. One person commented that the window where the person, like the window we're looking at right now, that would be all the way down in the corner. We moved it up a little bit for overscan on television, to be in title safe. Mm-hmm. So that was something we did for television that if this would have been purely online, we probably would have, that's a very nitty gritty answer, but we would have moved that square where Blair Trigger is talking all the way down. Those little details, we had to kind of compromise a little.
Yeah. Josh was lingering on those shots a little bit long. It's hilarious. Everybody has to watch it to get some more of the context there. So Too Many Cooks, like comparing them, because I keep bringing up Too Many Cooks because it was like one of my favorite things. I passed it around to everyone I knew.
Thank you so much.
I absolutely loved it and thought it was hilarious and gritty and weird. And if you haven't seen it, definitely see it. So it's impossible for me to watch these two and kind of compare them to a certain degree. Too Many Cooks, almost entirely non-narrative. I think you get a little bit of narration at the very, very end. Final Deployment 3 is almost entirely narrative. How do you compare like the difficulties of creating these two things? Because they're very different in approach, it sounds like.
I think in my mind, they're similar in the sense that they're trying to set up an expectation and then lull you, as you were saying earlier, and then surprise you. But you're right. The form of a video game walkthrough is wall-to-wall dialogue. So that was a challenge. While the form of Too Many Cooks was music. Yeah. But I actually would even say Too Many Cooks sort of has a narrative in a way.
I don't mean to imply that it doesn't have a narrative or it doesn't have a story, but more that there's like that it's dialogue less.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Totally. It really relies on a lot of action and a lot of visual, whereas Final Deployment is very dialogue driven. I
think one thing I will say is that probably is we intended Final Deployment to be 11 minutes as well, but because it's the nature of that form is people are talking, it ended up just expanding to get everything we wanted to do. So it ended up being 22 minutes. So hopefully the audience can roll with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, you know, like we've said a couple of times, it gives you time to kind of fall into that comfort zone. Some of the best movies that I've seen, you know, spend the first hour as one movie and then suddenly in the middle take a U-turn and spend the last hour being something completely different. So it kind of falls in line with that. And then you do a lot in your pieces, at least these two, with kind of like breaking apart what you think is reality and going into a different direction, like we're talking about. I kind of have referred to it as like this nested reality approach. And I would imagine, like I've never made a film or anything, but I would imagine that's very hard from a storytelling standpoint to keep straight. What were the challenges there, both from a writing standpoint and a technical standpoint? I have to imagine there's some challenges in kind of approaching that style of a story.
Yeah, the writing was probably the easiest part, but then in constructing it with the layers and getting, when people are talking at the same time, to layer that the right way so you can hear the correct phrase that you want people to hear, if possible. And then just all the different HUD design we had to do, which is sort of a very big field. And, you know, video games spend a lot of money getting that just right, you know, and just all the layers. We did it in Premiere. Nick Gibbons is also our editor, and just the number of layers he had to build. It got so complicated. It took like a half hour to load the project. So we would load it and then go do something.
Oh man, that's a nightmare if it ever crashes also, because I've definitely been there. and when you talk about Premiere, probably with any software, but at least in my experience with Premiere, it's going to crash at least once. That's going to happen.
Oh yeah, you're going to get the beach ball. Yes, for sure.
I think the big question that I have for you as we kind of wrap this up is, I love your short style format. I love your short film format. I have to imagine, you know, everybody that you talk to that loves your work is asking you, all right, when are you going to give us a feature length? I could totally see like Sam Raimi. You would make Sam Raimi proud in like tackling a horror comedy or something along those lines. Do you have anything in the works that you're willing to talk about?
I do. I do. And it's so interesting you said that. It is a horror comedy.
Nice.
There's other stuff though. There's other genres, but that's right. Because a lot of people I thought I was going to do pure comedy, but horror comedy. And I'm writing it, and I had a problem where I would put it off because it's so daunting. So I have a friend. And I wrote him a check for $500. And if I don't turn in the script October 1st, he gets to keep that money. So
that's a good strategy. I like the way you
Pressure's
think.
On.
Yeah, that's the way you do it. Put your own money where your mouth is and make it happen. This is awesome. Casper Kelly, director of Final Deployment. It's Final Deployment 3, right? Or no, it's 4.
4.
My apologies. Yeah. Okay, I had it written down one place wrong. Final Deployment 4. Look it up online. You can go to adultswim.com and find it there, or on YouTube. And if you haven't seen Too Many Cooks, definitely watch that. And obviously stay tuned, because it sounds like Casper has some really cool stuff in the works. Casper Kelly, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It was an honor to be on here. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you soon. We'll be following your work. Take care. All right, up next, taking the plunge and deleting your Twitter history. Are you going to do it? I don't know. We'll talk to someone who did that. But first, this episode of Tech News Weekly is brought to you by Slide Belts, high quality, comfortable ratchet belts that are easy to adjust. I'm wearing my slide belt right now. The only way I can prove that to you is by going, putting it in and going, did you kind of hear that? That's a ratchet because it's not little belt loops. It's a ratchet form. And that's how slide belts differentiate themselves. They're awesome. It actually changes how you feel about old school belts. Obviously, belts aren't something that you talk about too often. Usually, you just kind of hit that last hole on the strap and you kind of have to struggle to make it fit and you move on with your life. Well, slide belts don't have those holes. Like I said, it's a ratchet design and it's satisfying to put on. Here, I'm going to pull this slide belt out of the box here. When you get it, it's all looped up and you get the entire length of it. So you can basically cut it to the length that you need and you slide it into the system. And once it's cut and it fits perfectly, you can fit it on and then you get that really satisfying. You can see the kind of ratchets underneath those little bumps. You slide it in there and pull it. And that's it. That's the slide belt kind of locking into place. It's really satisfying, and it basically means that your belt's going to fit you better than anything else. With 32 adjustment options, it's so much more comfortable than any other belt that I've worn anyways, and I'm sure you will too. Such an improvement over traditional belt. You can easily remove the buckle, mix and match with other straps for ultimate customization and versatility. Slide Belts offers a wide selection of straps from full grain and top grain leathers to high quality canvas and animal friendly vegan. Slide belts can be worn casually around the house, at the office, out for date night, wherever you're going to put on a belt, but they look nice. They look awesome. It's a great travel belt as well. Slide belts are easy to take off and put on while going through security. And if you're still not convinced, Slide Belts offers a 1-year warranty, free exchanges, and no hassle returns. If you're ready for a better belt, go to slidebelts.com/twit and use code TWIT at checkout to receive 20% off your order. That's slidebelts.com/twit. And don't forget to use code TWIT for 20% off your order. And we thank Slide Belts for their support of Tech News Weekly. Sharing on social media has long been a societal norm, at least for those of us in the technology world. We live with technology, we breathe it, and so we've been oversharing for a long time now. Only in recent years have many people began to ponder the long-term ramifications of oversharing in a public space. And if you hit that point, you might consider going nuclear and deleting all of that history altogether. Well, today's guest decided on a whim to do just that, and she wrote about her experience on Wired. Welcome to the show, Emily Dreyfus.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason.
Hey, it's great to see you.
Yeah, you too.
So happy to have you on today. So I read your piece last week and I was like, oh my goodness, we have to make this work because I feel like I've talked to some people and I've thought it myself, I've got this, 10 plus years of Twitter history. Why am I holding on to it? It's not like I ever refer to it or, all that kind of stuff. And in recent history, it seems like all your Twitter history can do is cause you trouble.
Yes.
How much history are we talking about here that you deleted, and what exactly motivated you to do that?
So my Twitter oddly used to say that it was started in 2009, but in reality, I started it in 2011. So my archive went back to 2011 and I had 24,000 tweets. And that's a lot of tweets. I mean, I've spent a lot of my 20s and early 30s looking at my phone and ignoring my friends and family and instead of, so that I could be online. So there was a lot on there. Most of it was jokes, a lot of tweeting with my family. I'm one of those maybe rare people whose entire family is on Twitter. And so I interact with my mom there sometimes.
It's like public instant message basically at that point.
It really is. So there's a whole gamut of stuff. And then of course, I'm a journalist. And so I share my stories. I share the stories I've edited and those that I'm reading. So, I mean, there was just a ton of stuff on there. And I, like you, I never went back and looked at it. I always kind of thought that I would one day do that. That there would be some utility in it, or that someone would one day ask me, what were you thinking about in 2013 on this date? And I'd have to know. No one ever asked me that question. And it turned out never gone back and looked. And so the reason I ended up deleting it was just mainly, I have to come clean. A lot of it was just, I think, peer pressure, because a lot of journalists have been deleting their tweets lately, and I've been seeing them talk about it over and over again in their timeline about the fact that they couldn't see any real reason to keep them. And at first I was aghast. And then the more I saw people talking about it, the more I thought, I really can't come up with a good reason to keep mine either. And in a sort of internet-esque whim of like, LOL, nothing matters, I pulled the trigger.
And I've considered it too. I mean, I read your piece and I was like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. I still have not. I'm still like walking that weird line of like, yeah, but why would I exactly? Like I don't feel like I have anything to hide in my tweet history, but then at the same time, like it's 10, 11, 12 years. I can't even remember how long I've been on since like I think 2008 or 2009, somewhere around there. Like there's a ton of stuff in there.
Yeah.
There's no possible way I know what's actually in there. What tools did you use? How did you do this exactly?
Okay, so there's a lot of tools, and if people are versed in Python, then they can do it themselves. There's all sorts of code repositories online where people have like set out how the instructions for how you can code it, because the Twitter API will let you do it. But I didn't want to deal with that. And so I actually paid a paid service called Tweet Deleter to do it. I had to pay $14.99 because I did not want to commit to a year-long subscription. But if I were willing to commit, then I think it's like $5.99, and you can set up automatic scrubbing so that like as you continue to use Twitter, it will go through and delete your tweets after a certain amount of time that you get to set yourself. But there are also other ones. There's something called Cardigan. That's a free app that I hear works. It just didn't look as easy to use as Tweet Deleter, and I wanted to do something super fast, and so I went with the paid option.
And obviously, you backed all this stuff up beforehand. It was something that I'd been meaning to do for a while, just to get my own copy, export my data, that sort of stuff. So after reading your piece, I did do that. It's pretty easy to do that, right?
It's very easy. Yeah, you just have to go into your settings, into your account, and then hit, request your archive, and then Twitter will send it to you. One thing that I made a point of writing in my piece that I want people to know is there's also the opportunity to request your Twitter data, and that is not your Twitter archive. That is the data that Twitter has on you about things you have liked and your behavior on Twitter. So if you only download that, you will not have your tweets. So just be aware of that. Those are two separate options. It's not completely clear, I think, when you look at your settings.
Yeah, and it would stink if you think you had the archive you delete and then you realize you didn't.
It really would.
What other unintended consequences? Because I know you wrote the piece last week and then you did a follow-up this week. That was kind of like, oh boy, I really, I did this and I didn't think that this was going to happen. Like, what are some of those unintended consequences that someone thinking about doing this can benefit from your facepalm?
I mean, so the first thing is just the headline of that article. I titled it "The Sadness of Deleting Your Old Tweets" because the second I had done it, I felt this rush of sadness, and I had to interrogate, why am I feeling emotional about this? Right. And, for one thing, I just realized that Twitter has been, for better or worse, a really big part of my life. I've met people on Twitter. I've, shared stupid thoughts. Maybe some of them have been smart. I've done a lot of my work as a journalist is using Twitter. And so to delete it all in one fell swoop felt like an end to a period in my life. Like a finality in a way that I hadn't really totally anticipated that it would feel like, oh, okay, so now I'm moving on to a new era, a new kind of relationship with the internet where I don't really necessarily take things for granted and that I'm going to want to keep this data out there in the public. The other thing that I knew going into deleting it, but wanted to then really make abundantly clear to readers in the follow-up piece is that when you delete your Twitter account, especially if you're at all a moderately public figure, which, I mean, I'm just a lowly journalist that very few people know who I am, but enough people know who I am, that I had people tweeting to me right after I deleted it saying like, Emily, I screenshotted all of your tweets that I liked. I have them myself. And I was flattered and creeped out. But then
They may or may not have been telling the ultimate truth, but anyways.
They had one guy had the receipts, although he only had one tweet. But,
okay, all right.
But then there's also, the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine is scraping the web. And though the Internet Archive didn't have all of my tweets, it had a lot of them. It had scraped my page, I think, 120 times. And so, if there are people out there who are going to want to weaponize my history and take my tweets out of context, which is the thing that has motivated so many journalists, and not just journalists, but celebrities to actually delete their histories, it doesn't really achieve that because they can find something of mine online.
Right, and then there's always the question of, if you're going to great lengths to delete it, well, why are you doing that? What do you have to hide? I mean, today there's even a story today that's making the rounds. Obviously, Sarah Jeong from The Verge hired at the New York Times. Some of her old tweets are now being resurfaced, and that's causing her, and the New York Times and The Verge, a lot of headache from people who are taking those tweets and like you say, weaponizing them. I'm not making any distinctions here on whether the positive or negative of the tweets that she put out there, but you guys can look it up. But I mean that's a serious concern. I mean, whether you yourself realize or personally think that this tweet is offensive or not, somebody else might, and it might not have ever been your intention, and then boom, it explodes in your face. So people are going to ask, why are you doing it then?
Absolutely. And Sarah Jeong's tweets, I think, are a perfect example of what I'm talking about because she actually had deleted her Twitter. So her history wasn't on Twitter, but
interesting.
Those screenshots were available still because you can't really truly delete anything on the internet. And that's an important message to get across. But yeah, also, the second I deleted my tweets, people were like, oh, what did you have back there? We don't remember you doing anything really offensive, but there must have been something and we missed it.
Right.
Which sort of defeats the purpose because after all of these years of being on Twitter, I actually had been kind of a very careful tweeter. And even beyond that, I personally don't think that I was saying anything offensive, but so there is the unintended consequence of if you do it, you may end up looking guilty.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Has this affected, going through this, affected or changed how your current relationship with Twitter? I know you said this is moving you into a different phase with Twitter, but do you now think about tweeting or even updating other social networks differently, what you selectively choose to put out there now? Is it different now than it was prior to this?
Well, I definitely am more nervous on Twitter now because frankly, there's just this blank slate. So all the tweets that I tweet now are my only tweets. And there was something protective about a 24,000 tweet record that sort of set my personality. If you were curious about who I was, you could, if you wanted to, scroll through and see. And now I only have 120 tweets. And the second that I sent the first one, I was like, oh my God, this is the panic I felt in 2011 when I sent my first tweet. It feels like the first time all over again. And so that is very strange. Some other people I've spoken to who have been tweet deleters for longer do describe that it has made the platform feel more like a chat room and less like, some sort of contribution to the permanent record. Right. And I would say that, in my 1 week of this experience, that sounds true. I'm also I think that there is a general trend of people embracing ephemerality online. And, Snapchat was obviously the vanguard of that movement. But as we've been seeing with Instagram stories and Facebook stories to a lesser extent, I think that there is a big appetite for people to have a relationship online that is just in the moment and doesn't persist. And there are a lot of really good reasons, like cybersecurity reasons, why you wouldn't want to keep your information around for hackers to get. And, if you're going to post things about your family and your young children, if they grow up, they might not want to have that record online that their parents took their autonomy away from them by posting. So totally. I think there's a whole host of reasons to do this.
Interesting. So the new car smell basically at this point has worn off. Would you do it again? Would you recommend this to others? What do you think?
I think everyone has to do what's in their own heart. I don't want to give any recommendations. I don't regret what I did, and like so much that I wouldn't do it again. I think that it was perhaps I should have prepared myself emotionally a little bit better for how final this period of my life would feel when I deleted the tweets, but I'm glad I did it now.
Yeah. Awesome stuff. Emily, it's great to get you on. I really appreciate you taking time to join me today on the show.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You can follow Emily's work by going to wired.com and definitely check out both stories. Good kind of beginning to end detail around this if you're considering doing it for yourself. Thanks again, Emily. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jason. Bye.
All right. Take care. Finally, I told you we're going to talk a little bit more about Fortnite. Fortnite is a gaming freight train right now. In fact, the Android version of Fortnite is right around the corner, so even more people can become addicted to the Battle Royale mayhem, no matter where they happen to be in the world. It turns out some younger players feel that simply playing isn't good enough. Being good is equally important, and if it doesn't come naturally or if skills don't improve over time, it turns out parents are paying for Fortnite tutors to work with students to help them become more competitive at the games. A Fortnite tutor apparently runs around $20 per hour. Parents seem to be happy to pay it to help their kids do better in the game. They say, you know, it hopefully helps out in the awkwardness that is the social environments at school. Challenge, you know, the hallways can be very challenging when you're a kid, and if you're playing the game that everyone else is playing but you're not good at it, that can lead to, you know, social issues, I would imagine. Anyways, I remember this kind of pressure in school. I was the tall kid that absolutely sucked at basketball, so I get it. It just goes to show that there are a lot of ways to make money playing video games nowadays. Now you can be a video game tutor. Maybe you could all the time, but I just haven't heard about it before. Fortnite, by the way, is only 1 year old at this point, but it's crazy how successful it's been. It's the most streamed game on Twitch, more than 125 million players at this point, 40 million players per month. So it's no small game, and it's only going to get bigger now that it's about to roll out on Android. It's already on iOS. Everybody's going to be playing it. You too could be a Fortnite tutor. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Pacific at twit.tv/live. You can be part of the show by emailing us at tnw@twit.tv. Subscribe to the show at twit.tv/tnw. If you want to tweet at me and tell me all about your new profession as a Fortnite tutor, you can find me. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to our TD and all-around awesome guy, Josh. Thanks to Burke for scooching over here. Oh, wait, no, I'm lifting the veil. Thanks to Burke. Thanks to Jammer B. Thanks to Patrick, Colleen, and everyone who helped me on the show. And thanks to you for watching this week. We'll see you next week on another episode of Tech News Weekly. Thanks, Burke. Oh, that was weird. Let's do it again. I'm gonna.